Today, as we continue on with our biome eco-series systems, we're going to be talking about coral reef ecosystems and the who, what, when, where, why, and how this info can better help you to grow plants. Let's get started. When first looking at why is it important to even study ecosystems or biomes, I think it's really important to understand why we do this and why we even care. First off, biomes are located literally all over the world, and they vary based on their geographical location from the latitude, longitude, even the elevation can have a huge effect on what they are. And so by understanding these, we can take a look at the plants that grow in these that have adapted to these environmental factors, and by looking at those, we can then understand what are going to be the individual plant needs to better help take care of those plants that we're trying to recreate, and by knowing the individual requirements, not only their water uptake, but the nutrients they need. Because by understanding that, we can then properly care for the plants that we are trying to grow. In looking at the different ecosystems, they're going to be layered. They tend to be a little bit larger for tropical forests and grasslands, and as your temperature increases and as your dryness increases, there tends to be a very specific slope on how it occurs. Being the tropical regions are going to be your largest biomes, and as you gradually grow smaller, your temperate regions are going to gradually grow smaller as well. Today with the coral reefs, it's going to be geographically speaking, it's going to be one of the largest ecosystems that we take a look at. They're going to be located on the band around the Earth that runs along the equator, generally around Central America, Central Africa, and across the Indonesian islands. And that band that runs along the equator is where most of your coral reefs are going to be located. And they're generally going to be in the coastal zones of these regions, ranging between sea level and typically about 150 feet below sea level. But you're not going to find anything below that just because it won't get enough sunlight to there. But typically speaking, they're going to range between 5 feet below sea level and maybe 50 feet below sea level. But they can be as low as 150 feet. Now, the greatest and largest example that we are going to find of this is going to be what is called the Great Barrier Reef that is located on the eastern coast of Australia. This is by far the largest and most prominent example of how great a coral reef actually can be. When looking at the average temperature of these, they are going to be purely located on the equatorial zone throughout the entire world. And so because of this, they are very temperature specific, and they are not going to have much deviation in temperature. In fact, coral reefs cannot survive on temperatures below 64 degrees, which makes it a very stable environment that tends to have very, very minimal swings. That's why when you tend to have a major swing shift in temperature, there are scientists and other people that tend to get concerned just because they are going to be a much more stable environment that can't handle major shifts in their ecosystem because of how stable they have been for literally hundreds, if not thousands of years. In coral reef itself will take literally hundreds of years to grow, and the individual plants, you'll only get mere millimeters of growth per year. And that's why it's so concerning that we do monitor them very closely and try and help in protecting them. Even though they are located below ground, so it really doesn't matter how much rainfall they don't below water level, it really doesn't matter, but the high amount of rain is indicative to the region, and it will also bring a high amount of humidity. So typically speaking, around these areas, you're going to find on average about 80 inches of rain per year. Now, this can have an effect because the amount of rainfall will affect the local salinity of that water. And so by having a higher rainfall, it will help to keep the salinity down, allowing these various corals to survive. the soil structure that you're going to tend to find around these areas is going to be more sandy soils that have been immersed in salt water. And this is going to be one of the greatest concentrations of calcium that you are going to find, often from the coral reefs itself, but also from seashells, clams, and other various creatures that are going to be collecting calcium from the water and incorporating it into their shell structures. Primarily as a defense mechanism, but they will also utilize it for building up a trunk-like system for the coral reefs. Now, when you look at the vegetation of these areas, it's most likely going to be very small algae floating items. Most people, when they look at coral reefs, they think of them as a plant, but in actuality, they are actually an animal, not a plant. And so the largest that you're going to find of plants is generally going to be of a plant called kelp and sea grasses. When you're looking at coral reefs themselves and the type of animals that you have, most of them are going to be small fishes, invertebrates such as crabs, mussels, other seashell-dwelling creatures that we mentioned, but also you're going to get into larger predators such as eels and sharks that prey off of these smaller invertebrates. As mentioned before as well, the coral reef, even though the corals look like a plant, they are actually animals in themselves. So that is another unique that is specific just to these areas. Now, when we're looking at the coral reefs, all these great, and even though it is very gorgeous and beautiful that they are contained, why is it so important, or why do we even care about the coral reefs? Well, coral reefs are a major source of micronutrients in the form of salt deposits that are mined from the water, where they drag it up on shore, they're going to dehydrate it, and then they're going to scoop it up and mine it. Others is the sheer amount of soil deposits or the soil amendments that we get, whether it's from the crushed seashells or other items, that is a major source of calcium. Likewise, you're going to find a large amount of kelp that is harvested from these massive seagrass farms. Another item that you're going to find from this is going to be fish emulsion that is highly utilized within the gardening realm as a very prominent source of nitrogen. It's also going to have a little bit of phosphorus as well that is highly utilized. Overall, coral reefs are a major source of soil amendments that in most cases are very highly renewable, and because there's so much of it, it can be found for a relatively cost-effective price. Well, I would like to thank you for joining us this video as we take a look at a cursory glance of coral reefs and why it's important that we'd want to try and learn about it a little bit better. And we look forward to seeing you next time. And now, here's a word from our sponsors. This episode of Yule Acres is brought to you by Yule Acres Grapefruit Naturally Scented Lip Balm. For more information about this product, click on the link in the description below.